In this video, I'm going to demonstrate how to insert a row of data into a database using linked entities. Now, if I was trying to be really proper about this, I would say how to add a new instance of an entity object into a collection of entities that happen to be stored in some repository that you might know as called SQL Server. I don't know how you're supposed to say it, but I'm going to show you how to insert a row data in a database. Okay, and you might think that that would sound like an easy operation. That's something that should be relatively easy to do, and usually is, except for the fact that our project that we've been working with, Editio Net 4 linked entities, I made a tactical decision to go with the compact edition of SQL Server because it's more portable and I can get that code to you a lot easier. Well, this is the point where things start to break down a little bit. Let's take a quick review of the database that we have created for these examples. We have two tables, customers and orders. They each have a primary key. In the case of the customers, it has a column called customer ID that has its auto increment set to true and its data type to integer. Same thing is true with order ID, auto increment true, data type integer. So that when we add a new record into the database, we never had to fill in the order ID or the customer ID. The database would automatically generate that for us, right? And then we also have this customer ID that gives us a foreign key relationship between orders and customers. So when we take a look at our entity model, we can see that represented like so, where there's a relationship between the two tables. More importantly for our purposes is that there's this customer ID, and if we take a look at it, it has a property called stored generated pattern, and if we read the description, determines if the corresponding column in the database will be auto-generated during insert and updated operations. And we have by default, the stored generated pattern set to identity. It can also be computed or none. But when we add the tables, when we selected generate database from, or I'm sorry, update the model from the database, and we selected these two tables, that's what we got by default, because it saw that we had an auto-incremented column for customer ID and for order ID. All right, I say all of that to say this. Inserting a new instance of an entity into your repository is as easy as this, supposedly. So we have a customer entity. It's a single instance of the customers table. So customer new cust equals new customer. So far so good. And then we can go about setting the properties of our new cust to our new customers. First name and last name. Alright, so then all we need to do to save this new entity, instance of an entity, is just to go DE for our, if you recall, we have way up here at the top our database one entities one, which is basically our model. If we select it, remember that's the entity container name, that's how we reference it, so I just called it DE for database entities. So DE dot, and there's a couple ways we can do this. The old way to do this, before Entity Framework 3.5 Service Pack 1, before Entity Framework 4.0 that you find in standard in Visual C# 2010 or Visual Studio 2010, is to use this add to customers, and that's a pretty neat way to do it. So we'll come back to that in just a minute. New cust. And then we just have to say, all right, Entity Framework, you've been keeping track of what's changed. You know what's new, what's been changed, and what needs to be deleted in the database. So go ahead now and save those changes. So that's what that method does. So this add to customers will take the new customer and add it to a entity set, the customers entity set, and it will then leave a dirty flag turned on, meaning that I need to be saved. At which point, when save changes is called, it looks through all of the entities that belong to our context here, in this case that database entities, and it will save those that need to be inserted, save those that need to be updated, delete those entities that need to be deleted. All right, and then just to verify that this actually worked, we can then just select that row out, just like we've been doing in the previous videos. So something like var cust equals from C in de.customers where C dot state is equal to Colorado. Select C, and then we can just do a console.writeLine C ust.account, and we'll just print out how many now are actually in Colorado. Now this is where the fun begins. I'm going to run the application. I'm going to get an exception right there. And so unfortunately things start to go downhill. If you kind of select this troubleshooting tip, you're going to get a very generic web page from MSDN that doesn't really describe what the problem is. The most helpful thing you can do is either click the view detail, or what I prefer to do is copy exception detail to the clipboard. Here I'm going to go to my notepad then, and I'm going to hit Control V to paste it into my clipboard. And so now I just start reading through it. An error occurred, and I'm always looking at these messages, right? And there's a couple spread throughout here. Message: an error occurred while updating the entries. See the inner exception for details. All right, so then I'm going to look at an inner exception here. Gives me another message: an error occurred while preparing the command definition. See the inner exception for details. All right, so I'm going to go to another inner exception. I'm going to look at its message. Server generated keys and server generated values are not supported by SQL Server Compact. And here's where the problem exists. There's nothing you can do to make this work. Not the way that we have it built right now. The problem is this. When we designed our database, first of all using SQL Server Compact Edition, and then choosing to use a auto increment field, we automatically prevented Entity Framework from being able to insert records into it. There's no way to fix that. It's a known issue. You could search on that error message. It'll bring you to some stackoverflow.com discussions about what your remedies are, but I'll give you a high-level overview of how you can fix this problem. Don't use Compact Edition. Compact Edition makes sense in some cases. It made sense for us up to this point in this video series because I wanted you to be able to take this, the code that I'm writing, and just be able to run it without having to set it up in SQL Server Express Edition. I didn't want to have to explain all those things. It just made things easier. It makes sense whenever you're just distributing a desktop-only application, like a consumer-based application, and you never need to share the data outside of that. All those reasons we've already gone through. But it doesn't necessarily make sense when you're butting your head up against problems like we are right now. Most of the applications are server-based anyway. So I'm going to now start working with SQL Server Express Edition for the remainder of this video to demonstrate how to do this the right way. So your first option is not even use Compact Edition. The second option is you could continue to use Compact Edition, but instead you could use what are called unique identifier fields. And so instead of type integer, you would use type unique identifier. And then you would create new GUIDs, which are globally unique identifiers, to create one on the client. In other words, I would create one right here, just like this, new cust dot customer ID equals, and I think I could just do GUID dot new GUID, and it would create a new GUID for me, and that would work if customer ID was of type integer, but it's not, so it gives me that little error message. So I could just switch and not use integers anymore. I would just use GUIDs, and then I would be responsible for generating the GUIDs on the client. I don't like that solution because if you I believe that if you have multiple clients connected up to the database, and again, this is only a Compact Edition database, so the chances of this are not as prevalent. But I would prefer something as close to the data as possible to generate that ID. That's just my preference. Some database administrators would say when you get to building larger systems, you want to avoid using GUIDs because of performance issues and potential collisions. I don't want to get into all that right now. It's generally not always a great idea to use GUIDs for your primary key. And so the third option then is to go ahead and use the int data type for your primary keys. But don't turn on auto increment and allow the software again to generate it. And there's a way you could do that. What we could do is this. Let me just show you how you could go about that. And I still don't think this is a very good idea. And I'll explain why in just a moment. And we're kind of stealing a page from our previous videos in day 10 here with the first or default. Okay, so now I'm just grabbing the topmost or the highest numbered customer ID, and so then right here I would go new customer ID plus equals 1, or I'm sorry, that's not right. I would do cust ID plus 1. Or something along those lines, okay? Now the reason I don't like this, again, is that well, two reasons. First of all, I don't like generating the IDs inside of my C# code. I just don't. I know some people prefer that method. My only contention with that is if you have other applications that are using this database as well, then everybody has to enforce some unwritten rule. There's no software to enforce that until you run into an error, and it would be very difficult to track down. It's I guess a form of having a weakly typed interface. In this case, it would be weakly typed. We'd have some magic rule that just everybody would have to know who works with the application's code. I don't like that kind of stuff. It makes me a little squeamish. The other reason I don't like it is because we're making 2 requests of the database instead of just 1. Here I'm doing a potentially expensive select inside of our database, and then I'm actually saving the data back just to do an operation that should only take 1 hit on the database. And it's more like the principle of it. I don't like that. That doesn't sound right or feel right to me. And so I would probably discourage you from doing that as well. My preference would be just use a different database if you possibly can, and I think you can. And so that's what we're going to do. I'm going to go ahead and leave this the way it is. I'm going to make sure you get it when I distribute the code with this video. But I'm going to stop the recording of the video right now, and I'm going to show you the solution and redo this video, redo the code in the next video to demonstrate this technique using SQL Server Express Edition. So I'll see you in the next video. Thank you.